Okay, hold on. Yeah. Sorry, I lost, there we go. For our next presentation, we have Megan Lanter from Hanover College. And she is going to be talking about jury biases in cases of sexual assault, impact of attractiveness and athleticness on jury decisions. Take it away, Megan.
Okay. As Skip graciously introduced me, I'm Megan. I'm talking about different types of way that juries can be influenced in different cases, this specifically talking about sexual assault. So introduction. So my research question was, how do factors such as attractiveness of both the defendant and the accuser and whether or not the defendant is a college level athlete change a juror's perceived guilt of the defendant? And I also added not just perceived guilt, but also what they would actually choose for the final verdict, whether it be guilty or not guilty, and also the recommended sentencing. But that was the original research question that I started with. So the halo effect is the idea that beautiful is good. And that's been seen in lots of different cases, like legal cases where people are generally more inclined to believe attractive people and think that they're less likely to do something bad. There's also different jury biases, such as defendants who cry on the stand are more likely to be believed, and also attractive defendants, and specifically sexual assault cases, are more likely to be believed, whereas attractive accusers are also more likely to be thought of as innocent. There's also the notion that athletes are more likely to be aggressive towards women than non-athletes, but I couldn't find anything talking about whether or not they're more likely to be believed in court, or if they're more likely to be accused of sexual assault. Well, they're more likely to be accused of sexual assault, but not more likely to be accused of sexual assault in court. I didn't find anything on that. So it's my hypothesis. Sorry, I copied the wrong thing. Okay, so my hypothesis is that individuals who have an attractive accuser, individuals who have an unattractive accuser but an attractive defendant who is an athlete is more likely to be let off or given a more lenient sentence and have lower perceived guilt, whereas people who have an unattractive defendant who is not an athlete but an attractive accuser are more likely to be thought of as guilty and receive higher sentencing. So I had 112 included participants. I did exclude 26 participants for different reasons, such as nationality. So if they weren't from the US or a citizen of the US, I did not include them. Also, there are a few people who didn't complete any of the demographics who we decided not to include. And there are a few people who didn't fill it out with the best intentions and were like malicious participants who put random things for the demographics that led me to believe that they weren't taking it seriously, such as one of them said that they were on the jury for OJ's case. They were 26 male and 82 female, and then 4 who identified as other, so non-binary there 2, genderqueer there was 1, and 1 preferred not to answer. The average age was 21.67, standard deviation of 14, but the age range was really, really wide, which I really liked. It was 18 to 76, so we got like a really wide range of participants. I used mostly social media for my recruitment method, but I also did snowball sampling, convenience sampling, and there were some undergrad psych students who may have received credit. So I had my demographic survey, my photos, my vignettes, which is just like a little blurb from each the accuser and the defendant about what they said happened, and then a 3-question questionnaire at the end. So these are the faces that I used. The left 2 were the ones that were objectively unattractive. I got this from Talmaz et al. They were ones that verified it. So these are the 2 that were unattractive, and then the right 2 were attractive. The vignettes basically just give an outline of what both said happened during the alleged sexual assault. The main difference for the defendant was that it either said, I'm a current college student or athlete, depending on the condition that they were in, and then also it would say a large D1 school if they were an athlete. But it just gave both claims of the event. my different measures was, the first one was perceived guilt. I used a 1 to 7 Likert scale, 1 being not guilty at all, 7 being completely guilty, and I got that from Coons. And then I just decided to do verdict guilty or not guilty to prevent people from just fence sitting and just deciding on 4, and I thought that it would give me like a better indication of what they would actually choose if they were pressed for a decision. And then also recommended sentencing, I used, again, a Likert scale, 1 released without penalty, and 7 15 years in prison. So my procedure was, first there was a trigger warning just to make people more comfortable with the potential that they're going to be reading something about sexual assault, because lots of people have experienced that, and I want to make sure that they weren't uncomfortable. After that, there was the informed consent, the demographic survey, so they would have been one of 8 conditions, with either an attractive accuser or an unattractive accuser, with attractive defendant or an unattractive defendant, and then an athlete or non-athlete. So they got 2 of those photos, 2 of the vignettes, and then they were asked to judge the perceived guilt, decide on a verdict, and give the recommended sentencing. And then there was a debrief form. So my results weren't great. I didn't find anything conclusive. You can sort of see just by the means and the standard deviation, there isn't that much variety. Yeah, it was very, very similar across the board. The biggest difference was that in the unattractive accuser, unattractive defendant, and non-athlete, there was a relatively, low mean for perceived guilt, but it was basically pretty same across the board, hovering around upper 4s. So looking at the actual ANOVAs, you can see that the P's are pretty high. Some of them get relatively up there towards 1, which isn't great, and we didn't find anything that was significant. And then we did find 1, the athlete versus defendant, that was just hovering around significant, meaning that the athletes or the defendant's attractiveness did have some effect on the sentencing was influenced by both the defendant being an athlete or not, and the defendant being attractive or not, but it didn't go in the direction that I thought. It was actually people who were unattractive were more likely to be let off in some cases. So possible improvements / limitations was the photos. I think that there was not a big enough difference between the attractive and unattractive faces, and I wish that I had looked harder to find ones that had more of a clear difference, but I did get them from a previously verified study, so I thought that was going to be enough. But if I could change one thing, I think that'd be the main thing that I changed. And then also with my vignettes, I would like to have had a clearer mention of athletic status, because we did have to exclude a lot of participants, or I had to exclude a lot of participants because they failed the manipulation check questions, because I did have 2 manipulation check questions. One being, was the defendant an athlete? And the other one being, did they have sexual intercourse? I ignored the sexual intercourse question when I was going through excluding participants, because there are some people who don't believe that rape is sexual intercourse, and I wanted to respect those decisions. But if someone was incorrect on saying whether or not they were an athlete, I did exclude them. And there were quite a few, so I wish that I had made that clearer. And then also I got a lot of comments from people who took my study asking about other evidence, such as DNA, eyewitness reports, and police reports, because when you are a jury, you do get all of that information. You don't just get the 2 little short blurbs. And then also, I had a really hard time having equal conditions. The number of participants and conditions after my excluded participants were taken out ranged from 8 to 15. And I thought that was a pretty big variation. And before that, before I took the excluded participants out, it ranged from about 10 to 25, which 15 people difference is really big. And then also, I wish that I used a 1 to 6 Likert scale to prevent people from fence sitting on 4, because as you can see with the means, there were a lot of people hovering around that 4 mark. So future direction of possible future directions, I would rather have it be a group decision rather than a single participant, because it's a more genuine jury experience, and it would cause people to like have to almost defend their decisions, because I didn't ask them to give a reason why they chose anything. And then having a group decision would make them more likely to really talk it out and make a more informed decision. I would also like to look at just athletic status rather than the interaction between athletes and attractiveness, and also different levels of athletes, because I feel like we hear a lot about famous athletes getting off on rape allegations and other things rather than just college level athletes. The college level athletes was mostly because of the Brock Turner case that I read about, and I thought it was horrible that he got off with such a light sentence. But again, if I could do it again, I think that I would like to look at just athletes rather than the interaction between athletes and attractiveness, and probably try and see the different levels of athletics, such as college level and professional. It would also be interesting to solely use individuals with a legal background, mostly because jury cases are becoming rarer, and it's more likely just to have a bench case, which is just the judge presiding over it, and then the participant could just represent the judge rather than the jury. Especially considering that a judge would just be one person making the decision, whereas a jury would be multiple people. And I thought it would also be interesting to do an in-person mock trial to give more of a genuine experience. So rather than online, have like a short mock trial with actors or law students and have them make the decision based off of that. Okay, thank you for listening. Are there any questions, comments, or concerns?
Yes. So way back in the beginning with the pictures of the defendant and the accuser, where did those come from? One of the reference studies, or where did you
Yes,
get
it came
those?
from a study. Give me 1 second, I'll get there.
Yeah.
I don't know what just happened.
But yeah. All right. I was just curious about that, whether
No,
or
it
not
did come from
where
a
where
reference
those came
study.
from.
I
Yeah.
didn't find the photos on my own. They came from a reference study, and I can't think of the name of the study right now, but it was on the slide that for some reason isn't showing up.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I got you. That was just something that's
Oh,
been
here we go. So
on my
yeah, it
mind.
came from Thomas et al.
Okay. Okay.
They had verified the differences between people were more likely to choose the attractive faces as attractive rather than the unattractive faces. But I think that part of that was because they were directly comparing the man versus the man and the woman versus the woman, which I should have mentioned that the man was the defendant and the woman was the accuser, instead of just leaving you guys to make that assumption. I should have made that clearer.
I
Hey, Megan.
missed that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. Did you get a Cronbach's alpha for that the study with the photos to see if it was a reliable measure?
They had, I don't have it here, but they had a relatively good Cronbach's alpha.
Okay. I was just wondering. Thank you.
Did you
Would it
do
be
anything with
Cronbach's alpha, Megan, or inner rate of reliability? Because there's not like a scale of items, right? Like, do you remember
sorry,
how they
what?
validated it? Do you remember how they validated the faces? Because it wouldn't be Cronbach's alpha. It would probably be like inner rate of reliability of like
They
similar.
had a study where they just looked at those faces.
Okay.
But I think, again, it was because they were directly comparing the man versus the man and the woman versus the woman.
Yeah. Actually, did you do anything with, I may have missed this, but I didn't see anything with the guilty, not guilty question.
Oh, I forgot to add that. So that also didn't, we ran a linear regression and it didn't receive anything. We didn't get anything from it. It wasn't, I should have added those numbers. I'm sorry.
The logistic.
The logistic question.
Okay.
I have a question. So I noticed that on like the guilt scale, you had like the 1 through 7 of like the guilty, not guilty, with like the 7th being like 15 years in prison. But I noticed when the sentencing like hit that no one actually went up that high. So I guess my question is, did you have kind of like sample cases that you thought were more severe, or you thought that like in your head like this is a guilty party, like dependent upon like the sentencing? Because like 7 is 15 years in prison. But however, on like the results, it seems like only people like really went up to like 4 or like
Yeah, I
5.
think that was the main problem, was that people were sort of sitting around 4, like looking at all of the people. It was meant to be like really up in the air whether or not they the defendant was guilty, and I think that was one of the reasons that no one went up to 7. There were a few people who did go that high. Most people didn't, though. There was like 1 or 2 cases, but 15 years in prison was just, I saw that in a couple of different studies that I looked at, none specific, but also that's sort of like higher up towards the actual potential sentencing for a rape case.
Okay, thank you.
If that makes any sense. I'm not sure if that answered your question.